The winter of 1691 was harsh. In Salem Village in Massachusetts, the cold bit to the bone, but a deeper chill resided in the minds of the people. Here, on the edge of the settled world, the devil was not a metaphor, but a tangible force. He lurked in the dense forest that began just beyond the village outskirts. The very woods where only a few years prior, battles of King William's War had been fought. The forest was more than just a landscape. It was the devil's domain, a fresh wound on the collective memory. This land, steeped in fear, was ready to ignite from a single spark. For the Puritans, the world was a battlefield between God and Satan. Any crop failure, livestock disease, or child's death had only two explanations: divine punishment or the devil's machinations. There was no third option. Their theology operated like a binary code, dividing everything into the divine and the diabolical. According to the doctrine of visible saints, only the chosen would achieve salvation. Therefore, everyone constantly scrutinized themselves and their neighbors for signs of grace or damnation. Any misfortune was not merely a difficulty, but a spiritual failing. Adding to this spiritual tension were very earthly conflicts. The Salem community was fractured. Wealthy, portside Salem town looked down upon the poorer farming Salem Village. But even within the village itself, there was no peace. For decades, animosity and envy smoldered beneath a pious surface. Disputes over land and influence divided neighbors into factions, primarily the Porters and the Putnams. The final straw was the appointment of a new pastor, Samuel Parris. His demands for firewood and ownership of the parsonage were seen by many as unprecedented greed, further deepening the community's divisions. The idea of witch hunting was not born in Salem. Decades before these events, accusations and executions had already occurred in New England. Legal mechanisms for prosecution existed. Salem did not invent this horror. It merely brought it to its absolute extreme. Just 4 years prior, in 1688, Goody Glover was executed in Boston. That case was investigated by Reverend Cotton Mather, one of the colony's most influential men. He even wrote a book about it, which became a kind of manual for future Salem judges. This nightmare already had its methodology. That very spark ignited at the epicenter of the division, in Reverend Parris's home. In January, his 9-year-old daughter, Betty, and his 11-year-old niece, Abigail Williams, began to behave strangely. They screamed, contorted into impossible poses, and complained of invisible needle pricks. Their symptoms were frighteningly theatrical. The girls barked like dogs, hid under furniture, and writhed so violently that, according to witnesses, it would have broken the bones of an ordinary person. The local doctor, William Griggs, finding no physical causes, delivered the verdict everyone feared to hear. They were afflicted by the devil's hand. For the 17th century, this was not superstition, but an official medical diagnosis. Frightened adults demanded an answer. Who is tormenting you? Attention immediately turned to Parris's enslaved woman, Tituba, who had been telling the girls stories of voodoo magic from her homeland. The panic was amplified by a chilling ritual performed by a neighbor, Mary Sibley. She baked a witch cake from rye meal mixed with the girl's urine and fed it to a dog. This pagan counter magic, intended to reveal the witch, enraged Parris and perhaps signaled to the girls that supernatural explanations were precisely what was expected of them. Under pressure, they named 3 individuals. The first victims were the most vulnerable members of society: Tituba, a foreign slave; Sarah Good, a homeless beggar who smoked a pipe and muttered curses when denied alms; and Sarah Osborne, an infirm widow who had married her indentured servant and was embroiled in an inheritance dispute with children connected to the Putnam clan. Their selection was no accident. These were ideal scapegoats, with no one to defend them. After several days of interrogation, Tituba broke, but she didn't just say yes. She painted a vivid, terrifying picture for magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin: flights on sticks, a black cat, the devil in the form of a tall man from Boston offering his book to be signed. Her confession transformed abstract fear into a concrete, the proven witch conspiracy in Salem. She didn't merely confess, she gave the accusers a roadmap for the entire future process. Tituba's confession became the trigger. Panic demanded action, and Governor William Phipps established a special court, Oyer and Termine, to hear and determine. Its main driving force was William Stoughton, a man without legal training but with a fanatical belief in his mission. Stoughton saw New England as a promised land and himself as its purifier from the devil's adherents. From the outset, this was not a court but a crusade, where the presumption of guilt became an unspoken law. The primary legal error of this court was the acceptance of spectral evidence. These were testimonies from victims claiming that they were tormented not by the accused person themselves, but by their ghost, their specter. Such an accusation was impossible to refute. How could one prove where one's spirit wasn't while one's body slept in bed? This concept transformed justice into an inescapable trap. The influential preacher Cotton Mather warned that the devil may assume the shape of an innocent person, but the judges interpreted this precisely in reverse. Even the most pious neighbor could be an agent of hell. Now, accusations rained down not only on outcasts. Respected community members came under attack. The deeply pious 71-year-old Rebecca Nurse and farmer John Proctor, who openly doubted the proceedings. This shocked the village, but also paralyzed it with fear. If such people could be witches, then who was safe? Martha Corey, known for her skepticism, was arrested. She laughed in the accusers' faces, considering it all absurd. In court, her laughter was presented as proof of her devilish nature. Her common sense became her death sentence. The trial itself devolved into a theater of horror. The accused stood before the judges. As soon as they began to speak, the afflicted girls in the courtroom would collapse, convulse, and scream that the accused's spirit was tormenting them at that very moment. Any attempt to defend oneself became new evidence of guilt. When an agitated defendant bit their lip, the girls screamed that they were being bitten. When they raised their hands in supplication to heaven, the girls writhed, claiming they were being choked. Every movement of the accused was instantly mirrored, turning the courtroom into an interactive torture chamber. The system created a monstrous choice. If you denied guilt and the court found you guilty, the gallows awaited. But if you confessed to witchcraft, repented, and named other witches, you were spared. This diabolical paradox rewarded lies and punished truth, accelerating the spiral of hysteria. Not one of the more than 50 people who confessed to witchcraft was executed. All 19 who were hanged insisted on their innocence until their last breath. To survive, one had to bear false witness against their neighbors. It was an assembly line for producing informers. On June 10th, 1692, the machinery of justice delivered its first death sentence. Bridget Bishop was hanged on Gallows Hill. She was an ideal target, twice widowed, married for a third time, owner of 2 taverns, and, most scandalous for the Puritans, she wore a bright red bodice. All the gossip accumulated over years was used against her. Her execution became a public declaration by the authorities. There was no turning back. While Bishop's death was anticipated, the case of 71-year-old Rebecca Nurse came as a shock. Her piety was known throughout the village. Dozens of neighbors signed a petition in her defense. The jury, after hearing the case, returned a verdict of not guilty, but Judge Stoughton immediately sent them back for further deliberation. He pointed them to a phrase Nurse, who was nearly deaf, had uttered during the trial about another confessed accused. Not hearing the question clearly, Rebecca remained silent. Stoughton presented this silence as proof of conspiracy. The jury, under pressure, changed their decision. She was excommunicated and hanged. Now everyone understood, if Rebecca Nurse could be a witch, then anyone could be. Farmer John Proctor made a fatal error. He didn't just doubt the girls, he openly called them liars and demanded they be whipped. The system immediately targeted him. First, his wife was accused, and then he himself. From prison, he wrote desperate letters, pleading for the trial to be moved to Boston, away from the Salem hysteria, but to no avail. He was hanged as a man who dared to challenge the madness. The next prominent figure was Reverend George Burroughs, a former Salem pastor whom the accusers named as the leader of the entire coven. The main evidence of his connection to the devil was his alleged superhuman strength. He supposedly could lift a heavy musket by the barrel with one finger. Standing on the gallows, he flawlessly, without a single stumble, recited the Lord's Prayer. According to popular belief, a servant of the devil could not do this. The crowd wavered, ready to rush to his defense. But then Cotton Mather intervened. Sitting on horseback, he reminded the assembled crowd that the devil is cunning and can appear as an angel of light. His authority settled the matter. The execution proceeded, but the most incredible act of defiance was performed by 81-year-old farmer Giles Corey. He chose a third path. To prevent his property from being confiscated and ensure it passed to his children, he refused to stand trial and utter the words guilty or not guilty. Under English law, without such a plea, a trial could not formally begin. He was subjected to a medieval torture known as peine forte et dure, slowly crushed by stones. For 2 days, boulders were piled upon him, demanding an answer. His only reaction to the torment was a phrase addressed to the sheriff: more weight. He died unbowed, winning his final battle for his family's future. By the autumn of 1692, the accusers, intoxicated by their boundless power, made a fatal mistake. They targeted those considered untouchable, names of wealthy Boston merchants, influential ministers, and finally, Lady Mary Phipps, the governor's own wife, began appearing on the lists of suspects. The hysteria ceased to be solely a problem for Salem's poor farmers. This was akin to the wife of a head of state, today being accused of treason based on anonymous rumors. The game had gone too far. The elite, who had until then silently observed the proceedings, began to act. The influential Boston clergyman Increase Mather, Cotton Mather's father and president of Harvard College, delivered a crushing blow to the ideological foundation of the court. He did not dispute the existence of witches. He attacked the methods used to find them. In his pamphlet, he articulated a principle that became a cornerstone of modern law. It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. Mather argued that the court, relying on spectral evidence, was using the devil's evidence to fight the devil, which was unacceptable. Governor Phipps, returning from a military campaign, found the colony in chaos. His wife was under suspicion, and the jails were overflowing. In addition, he received a letter from London, where the Privy Council expressed serious concern over the proceedings. In October, he finally intervened. With a stroke of his pen, Phipps dissolved the detested court of Oyer and Terminer. In its place, a new superior court was established. Its key difference, a complete prohibition on the use of spectral evidence. The result was astonishing. Without testimony about specters, the prosecution's cases crumbled before their eyes, leaving prosecutors with only old gossip and rumors. Of the 56 cases reviewed by the new court, almost all ended in acquittal. Only 3 were found guilty, but Governor Phipps immediately pardoned them, provoking the fury of the unrepentant Judge Stoughton. This was clear proof. The tragedy was caused not by witchcraft, but by a flawed judicial procedure. The wheels of justice had stopped, but the scars on society were only beginning to show. On January 14, 1697, the colony held an official day of fasting and repentance. On this day, Judge Samuel Sewall stood silently before the entire community as his confession of guilt for shedding innocent blood was read aloud. It was an unprecedented act of public repentance by a representative of authority. However, the chief architect of the trials, William Stoughton, remained unyielding until his death. It is said he angrily declared, "When I have been upon the bench, I have been always prayed to God, and I am still persuaded that I have done for the best, and there is no reason to alter it." Years later in 1706, one of the main afflicted girls, Anne Putnam Jr., also publicly sought forgiveness from the church and the families of the deceased. She stated that she had been deceived by the devil and wished to lie in the dusts for being the cause of their sorrow. Notably, she was the only key accuser who repented. The fate of the principal instigator, Abigail Williams, remains unknown. She simply disappears from the pages of history. Salem plunged into decades of economic and social decline. Families were forever broken, fields abandoned, and its reputation destroyed. Reverend Parris, in whose home it all began, was eventually driven from the community after years of disputes. It was not until 1711 that the Massachusetts colony officially reversed the convictions and paid small financial compensation to the survivors and their families. But it was already too late. Salem's name became forever synonymous with fanaticism and deadly injustice. So how did this happen? The Salem tragedy was not the result of a single cause. It was a perfect storm, a confluence of religious fanaticism, long-standing neighborly feuds, fear of frontier warfare, and, crucially, a legal system that gave paranoia an official license to kill. This is not a story about witches. It is a story about how easily a society abandons common sense under the pressure of fear. Of course, the question of the girl's behavior remains. The most well-known theory points to ergot poisoning, a fungus on rye that causes hallucinations. But this theory doesn't explain why the attacks were so selective. More likely, it was a complex cocktail of genuine psychosomatic disorder, where stress manifests in physical symptoms, and conscious acting by the girls, intoxicated by their suddenly acquired power over adults. But Salem is more than a historical anomaly. It is an eternal scenario. The mechanisms of a witch hunt, the search for a scapegoat, mass hysteria, and the abandonment of the presumption of innocence are universal universal. In the 20th century, playwright Arthur Miller saw in Salem a precise reflection of the anti-communist panic of the McCarthy era and wrote his play, The Crucible. And today, as online mobs deliver verdicts in minutes, this scenario repeats itself once more. And modern Salem, it has transformed its tragedy into a brand. The city's police cars bear a logo, a witch on a broomstick, a bitter irony, reminding us how easily the most terrible past can become a tourist souvenir.